Good evening. Today is Tuesday, May 7th. The time now is 6:37 p.m. This is a special meeting of the Board of Education. I am Chair Christina Baptiste Perez, and before we officially get into our meeting, I just want to start with just some groundkeepings. This is a meeting in public, not with the public. At any point in time, should members of this audience, or even if this board get out of line, you will be issued with a warning. If anyone continues to disrupt this meeting of business for the Board of Education, you will then be asked to leave and escorted out by the police. So we're now going to get started with the public comment. Just to clarify for the public comment, it is only regarding the agenda items only. Each member of the public wishing to speak may address the board for 2 minutes and only 2 minutes. Once the time is up, I may give you eye contact for you to hurry up and finish your last statement, and then we have to move on with our meeting. Today, we only have 2 people signed up. But before we get into the speakers, I'm going to let Madam Secretary Jennifer Perez do take attendance.
Sahiba Bain.
Present.
Christine Baptiste Perez.
Present.
Albert Benjamin-Hollis.
Present.
Akeisha Casimir.
Present.
Willie Medina.
Present. Present.
I got the presence here. Joseph Sokolovic.
Present.
Robert Traber.
Here.
And Andre Woodson.
Present.
All right, so we're going to now go to agenda item 1, which is public comment. The first person we have is Leslie Carvalho.
The superintendent this is about agenda item 3. The superintendent has displayed poor performance and has acted against the best interests of the children, parents, teachers, and the entire Bridgeport school system. Sometimes I wish she was a bad actor, but clearly this is her true authentic self. Classified along with certain board members that think it's more important to represent the destruction and crumbling of our children's future. In case you don't remember, in the very beginning, you translated both in English and Spanish of what you will bring to our school districts, and verbatim, you stated you will listen to the parents. And if they are frustrated, they have the right and you will not call the cops. Well, you have done the opposite and completely abandoned the Hispanic community. Furthermore, you continue to have conversations without including the community, the parents, the youth, and the school districts and major decisions you decided to make on your own, with the same board members standing behind you in these press releases. You are closing 6 schools in the next 36 months to recommend you to pausing and back to closing BLC this summer. Not to mention, you along with the same board members voted to pass $2 million on contracts with Hanover Relay before the budget came out, along with the same board members, and then the same thing with hiring a communication specialist over $80,000, which any of us would have gladly and effectively taken that position for free before the budget was even looked at and presented. However, you seem to have thought that that was a bright idea, and the mayor considering giving the school district a refund of $3 million of your negligence, once again underfunding us, when that could have been an additional few million. I believe in changing and second chances, but what I don't believe is when given the opportunity and benefit of the doubt to show you authentically have changed, and within a matter of weeks or days, you are back to what you are doing to begin with. So I conclude with the only evaluation needed is clearly a psychological eval of the superintendent and the action of not renewing her contract. Can I get a second and motion to approve what I just said?
All right, the next speaker on the list is Ann Traspasso.
Good evening. Tonight we are here to evaluate the superintendent's performance, which has been a rather public ongoing process as we have moved from the 100 days report, January 22nd, to the announcement that 6 schools were closing, to misinformation that the required BOE process had been followed, to the delay of the budget process. Communication has largely been delayed, which is a tactical error. Everyone knows that the best way to move towards change is to involve those impacted in the change process. The superintendent has failed in this key area. My overall assessment would be needs improvement. She does excel in spending money, though, money that we do not have. Most items brought to the board by the superintendent have involved hires. She has by far more assistants than any previous superintendent that is continuing to ask for more. An executive director of school turnarounds at $175,000, which is especially interesting as her 100 days report says. It was very necessary to ensure that we can begin taking Bridgeport off of all the various turnarounds in the State Department of Education. Why the turnaround on turnarounds? Along with the expensive hires, the BOE now has contracted with the unreputed by many educators Relay Graduate School of Education in Hanover Research. We have no reports on what they are doing. It would be good to have reports. The superintendent also referenced buying a curriculum, a truly shocking statement coming from an educator, as that's how one shows one's expertise and moves a class or a district in a particular direction with particular values. See culturally responsive below. A superintendent intent on farming out or delegating so much district work is not fully performing as a leader. The questions that I would ask the superintendent are related to the objectives identified in their 100-day report. What has specifically been done to move towards improvement in the areas she identified? Special education, early childhood
Mr.
education,
Spasso, can you wrap it up?
sheltered instruction, building teacher capacity, culturally responsive teaching and learning. That's what I would actually like to hear talked about at this meeting.
Great. The next item up is we're going to have an evaluation workshop with CABE. CABE stands for the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education. We have Nick Caruso here. Is going to. Done.
I'm sorry.
We're good.
As a wire anyway.
Thank you. So, we got a request, I think it was Thursday, if we could be here and talk about superintendent evaluation. So I have put some things together, but I guess really kind of wanted to have a general discussion about what it entails and process and such. I would start by saying that Connecticut state law gives the Board of Education some very specific roles, that being an agent of the state and looking out for the state's interest in public schools, governing through policy, and hiring and evaluating the superintendent, the most important things that you do. One could say that the hiring and evaluation of superintendent is probably the most important thing the board does. Now, I have a few different things to hand out. I apologize for all the paper. We're not going to be able to read all this stuff tonight. But well, I can tell you actually, spring of 2016, so short of 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, and CAPS, the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents, worked collectively on a joint definition of what a good leadership team model would look like. They came out with what they call a school governance position statement. And I'm going to pass these, if you could pass them down. Again, it's probably too involved to read through tonight, but basically it outlines where the roles of the superintendent start and finish, and where the roles of the board and start and finish. So you each have roles to play in the governance of the school district. You as the policy, as the governance board, the superintendent as your chief executive officer, and those are sort of identified within that. After they did that work, like one, they went a step further, and because everybody said, well, this is really great, but what does that mean in practice? So they came up with a joint team evaluation process. So again, he's out. Again, a lot of theory, not as much substance. There's enough in there to give you guidance on how to have an evaluation, but there's a certain amount that you are going to have to do through that process to actually implement it. Like that, they talk about, for instance, the different categories you have to look at the superintendent, but they don't actually give you like a worksheet that would follow along to help you score or rank or even just to take notes. So fortunately, like I said, a lot of good people have done a lot of work on this. A superintendent from Canterbury who actually teaches superintendents how to be superintendents in her night job. She just retired, but she was a superintendent during the day and taught at grad school for superintendents going through their 093 certification. She came up with a process for her board that actually, and I saw this goes back to 2013 when she first did it. But when I saw it, at first I said, this is really, really good. And she did it as a public school superintendent, so it's kind of a public domain document. But I did reach out to her recently and said, I like to use this. And she said, go for it. So this might be what gives you some guidance on how to proceed. Before we hand out more paper, because there's a couple more, basically, there's a couple different things that the board really kind of needs to do. And there's a few different ways that you can go about doing it. In some districts, and again, Dr. Camillo, Dr. Levy David is new to Connecticut, and so I'm sure the valuations are similar yet different in Texas to some extent. But it may be, I should point out that the way the state statute reads, it says the board shall evaluate the superintendent annually. So there needs to be an evaluation every year, and it's in a process mutually determined and agreed upon, which means it's not only the board that decides how we're going to have the superintendent's evaluation. It's mutually determined and agreed upon. In most districts with a new superintendent, what you would do is establish a subcommittee. Subcommittee would meet with the superintendent, work through a process to come up with something that everybody agrees to. In the absence of that, you may have to fall back on how it was done in the past, or keep working at it until you get it. But before that process started, I worked with a district, actually Rocky Hill, and they wanted to come up with a simpler, at least on paper, that's a simpler process. So they developed a short form. And it basically has there's like an overview that talks about, it has expanded opportunities for students to explore interests in things as academics, athletics, et cetera, has followed district goals, has implemented district mission vision. Then it gets into more specifics on things like curriculum development, professional development, supervision, budget, business, finance, infrastructure, staff and personnel, and policy. So again, might be another paper that you want to have in front of everyone to look at it and say, this might work for us. What you're really trying to do is establish, for lack of a conversation amongst the board members and the superintendent about where are our strengths, where are our areas that need improvement. In my mind, always focusing on how do we do what's best for the children of Bridgeport. As we talked about the last time I was here, 19,000 plus kids. Their future depends on what happens at this table. And so how do we all work together to make that happen? So a couple ways that we've done it. When I was board chair in Brookfield, the superintendent would write a self-evaluation, basically taking his goals for the last year, the prior year, and just basically doing a brief commentary on what his goals were, how we achieved them, areas of strengths, areas of need, but a pretty frank description of his year. And then the board met in executive session, first alone, and then with the superintendent to have a conversation about how do we feel, and then to meet with the superintendent and talk about here's our findings, or here's what we've found. In order to have, again, a conversation, at this point, nothing's still drafted or written up, but we've had a chance to talk and walk through. For instance, we had one where one board member was very concerned with our superintendent, who was brand new at the time. We don't feel that he's reached out enough to board members. And in his mind, have any of you ever called me and I didn't either take the call immediately or return the call immediately? And, well, you're right. So it was just a difference in the way they viewed it. The board member was like, he didn't call me all the time. The superintendent was feeling, I've reached any board member that had an issue, I dealt with it. So that needed some cross connections, some conversation in order for that to work out. And then at that point, in my district,
All four of you get together. All four of you stand together.
Mr.
Decide
Traver,
what you're gonna
please
do.
mute yourself. Mr. Traver, please mute yourself.
I'm sorry, I didn't know I'd unmute.
Just for clarity, he wasn't talking to us. He's talking now.
So, but basically, the board then would meet with the superintendent, and then when I was board chair, I would draft a letter to the superintendent saying, the board has completed your board evaluation. Here are the areas, again, that we felt were areas of strength, areas of need. In some cases, we discussed it after his first year when he had goals, we talked about his performance on the goals. Typically, as part of your process, there would be, the superintendent would draft, or collectively with the committee, you'd come up with a set of annual goals that you're going to be judged against for your evaluation. It could be that we sort of have the overarching strategic plan or goals, and I know here, Dr. David, you created the strategic plan, I think, so that might be the measurements by which the board says, how did we do? That's part of that conversation that everybody has to have up front. So it's not like you could just adjourn this part of the meeting, go into executive session and say, what are we going to do tonight? Because that process has to be prescribed up front. I would also say it's only fair that if you set goals for the superintendent, that it's very difficult to say, well, we set the goals on Monday and we're going to evaluate on Wednesday, that it would be next year, basically. So that it might be an interim evaluation where we're talking about sort of like the checklist, where how are we looking in terms of communication, managing staff, initiative, et cetera, curriculum development, whatever. And then as we get the goals, then we start to infuse that. The other thing I would say is, if you wait till 365 days from the day we start this process to actually start the actual review process, you're not doing anybody any favors. The Cape CAPS document and in general, we recommend that either you have quarterly, smaller sessions, like a interim evaluation, just so that there's no surprises. I've also found that if let's say something happened in July and we're not evaluating until next June, it's either going to sit there for a year and fester and perhaps could have been resolved quickly and easily if we dealt with it sooner, or it might be forgotten. It might have been important to remember it during that evaluation. So it's pretty good to have some either the 6-month period or quarterly, some sort of less formal part of the evaluation process where we're discussing ahead of time, where are we going? How are we doing? So it's not the final exam, but it might be a quiz or something, if you think of the metaphor. I threw a lot out very quickly. Questions, response to that?
You said in regards to, sorry. In regards to the evaluation that the board chair would draft a letter to the superintendent, would that also be presented in public at like a board meeting?
Yeah. So what I did, and I think other chairs do this around the state pretty regularly, I would draft a letter. I would share it amongst the board members. It's still a draft at that point. The board members would respond back to me and say, I'd like to see this language changed or whatever. That document then came to the board in executive session as part of our joint discussion. We would then read it, discuss it, and then at the end of that conversation, and after, again, meeting with the superintendent to make sure that we had reactions and opportunity to address some of those concerns, the board would then go into public session and then vote on the document. And it is a public document. It has to be shared. I just automatically, in this town hall, we had slots for all the different local papers when we had more than one. And I just bring copies and put them right in the slot. So the document is public record. Some districts put them on their website, but it's a matter of public record.
Any additional questions, Ms. Perez?
I would also mention in the fact that at drafting the letter, that we were very cognizant of the fact that There were times when we had to acknowledge the superintendent had a couple of areas that needed to be addressed, but we didn't want to hamstring our superintendent by coming up with a lot of critiques. So in a couple places, we had the conversation and we put in the letter something like, we are concerned about something, would like to see some progress on it in the next year. The second year, in our case, we had something that still hadn't been addressed, so we continue to be concerned. But in the third year, it's like, this needs to be fixed. So, progressive discipline or whatever you call it, but recognizing that this document becomes the community's view of what's happening, of your chief executive officer. The staff can see it, obviously, community members, families, parents. And so you are also mindful this is the CEO of your district. So it is important to acknowledge areas of need, but not necessarily, unless, again, there's such a concern that we need to address it more in more detail. But especially the first year, I think it's important to acknowledge here's areas that we need to improve. And again, if you're dealing with someone who's coming from out of state, I think it makes it even more important to make sure that we all have an understanding of where these are. I'm just thinking to how some of my colleagues in other states talk about the way their superintendents work. And in some places, it's very different than Connecticut. So what's the interaction and how do we get through that? I over-answered your question.
That's good.
Mr. Sokolovic?
Yes, good. You're talking about interim evaluations, you're talking goals and objectives and all that sort of thing. We're talking about the 25-26 evaluation, because pretty much we're past that point right now, because we got too much to satisfy state statute, correct?
Statute doesn't necessarily say when it has to be done. It just says annually. So, some boards typically have something where it's summer to summer, but I know some that's like March or April every year. It can vary. Usually it's not right around budget time because you already got your hands full with that. But like right after that or over the summer when things quiet down, some do it in the fall, at the beginning of the school year.
So the superintendent has started July 31st. So July 31st to August 1st would be one whole year.
Point of clarification, she started August 1st.
August 1st, okay, thank you. August 1st to July 31st is her contract date. Is that correct? Yes. So once that year is passed, is that considered outside of 1 year term in evaluating the superintendent?
It's definitely it's a year. I guess the question is, if you to satisfy, I'm not sure that you'd need to go through the full blown thing the first year because there's goals, et cetera. But I would say that it is in your best interest to at least organize whatever committee you're going to use to establish the actual process and get that done. And from that you can determine quite a bit, like when and where, et cetera.
And as an additional wrinkle that's aside from state statute, we also got some contractual obligations, because we're supposed to present we actually passed the contractual deadline to perform the evaluation. We're also supposed to provide the superintendent the document to evaluate her 30 days before she gives her presentation to the board in order to give her time to prepare. And that's got to be factored in as well. And also, if we find deficiencies and everything, to address those, give her a chance to address those as well, as far as the contractual rights. And I think we got to live within the contractual rights as well as the state statute rights, and we got to work within both documents. And it seems time is really of an essence.
So as I say, I think it's, well, the one part I'm not pushing back on what we're asking you to clarify, because you can't really present a document to the superintendent as much as you have to have completed a process by which you determine and agree on what that process is.
To address that, we have discussed the process, and we basically were almost in agreement for using the Cape Caps program. All state statutes requires that we agree on a process. I mean, Cape Caps developed a wonderful document that we've used for the last, ever since I've been on the board, and probably maybe 5 to 10 years before that. And it's been used for in different iterations for different superintendents, with the exception of one time, I don't think we used it, and it was like a one page.
I'm gonna call out another point of clarification. Per her contract, that was supposed to happen within the first 30 days, and that did not happen. So that's another breach of contract on
Yes,
the board's behalf, but that happened during the previous year.
And also, okay, I'll clarify even further. Evaluation. The board shall evaluate and assess in writing the performance of the superintendent in April of each year.
Is that your?
Said evaluation and assessment shall be reasonably related to the goals of the district for the year in question, which goals shall be communicated to the superintendent and board in writing prior to the start of the school year. The superintendent shall submit to the board a recommended format for such written evaluation and assessment of her performance. The evaluation format shall be reasonably objective and contain at least the following criteria: board superintendent relations, community relations, personnel relations, education programs, business matters, professional leadership, and personal quality. The evaluation format should provide for a rating system, both as to overall performance and as to specific criteria set forth in the evaluation format. And I'm going to skip a little bit. I'm just going to paraphrase. The board shall adopt an evaluation format within 30 days, which is the point Ms. Betsy Stores was. And then the board shall evaluate an executive session at least 30 days prior to the evaluation. The superintendent shall provide the board a self-appraisal using an evaluation format instrument. And the board shall take self-appraisal into consideration when conducting the evaluation. So, there's a
I
whole
said
bunch-
what I said, just
yeah,
different words.
right. But the main thing being, all the criteria in her contract as well is encapsulated in the CAVE document, the CAVE CAPS document. So I think rather than reinventing the wheel this year with 2 months left, conceivably 2 months left, that we should adopt the CAVE CAPS document in some way, shape, or form, whether in part or in whole, is not try to reinvent the wheel this late in the game.
You'd be joining 60, 70, 80% of the boards of the state if you use that document. As I say, it's developed collectively for that purpose. I mean, I used to get calls, we need a self-evaluation tool, and we had a stack of them this high from all these different districts, and I just pick and choose some and send them out. And then we finally got smart and said, well, we ought to just take, and if you looked at them, almost everyone had the same stuff, just reordered. So we just built one of our own and started handing that out, which actually have here. But this was, again, prior to the CAVE CAPS document. And even though I'm sure 90% of it is similar, I think the CAVE CAPS thing is a good roadmap. The only place, like I said, that might have some concerns is it doesn't get very specific on what the tool might be that you use if you want to have a checklist or whatever. And that's why I say that the Canterbury one, or I know you had a copy of another one, would be important to just give us some guidance on where, help us think through where are the strengths, and this is.
Any other questions?
So I guess the question would be, and if people were amenable to the CAVE CAPS thing, that subcommittee meeting might be very short, because it might just be, we agree on that, or it might be, again, if the superintendent is amenable to this, that we agreed, wouldn't be that hard a problem to resolve at least what we're going to do, and then you got to build a timetable and get that going. You see?
Yeah, again, okay, just to follow up on that. Yeah, since the subcommittee has to come back to the board for approval anyway, there's no statute to use a subcommittee. We could still do it as a committee as a whole.
Yeah.
Even this evening and adopt, if we so choose.
Yeah, I mean, as I saw your agenda, the second part of this, you could go in and negotiate what the tool looks like tonight, or what you.
How the process could look. So whether that's CAVE CAPS, another one, I've phoned another organization that we're part of and have another sample to discuss. And so hopefully that would we move forward into executive session, so I can present that to you. And then that will also give us a second so we could wow, that's old school, email. Email copies of materials that we received to our members that are virtual, so they have it in front of them. And that way we can actually take the time to process this, as our contract did start August 1. So we do have some time to make a deliberate and thoughtful decision. So it's not necessary to be rushed, but to start the process and the conversation now.
And also to point out, and I'm not encouraging you to postpone it longer than you need to, but there's no evaluation cops. The State Department doesn't sit there and go, you didn't do it on August 1st, you're out of compliance. I worked in one district, and the new board chair came in after the last chair had been in there like 10 years. And she called me and said, do we have to do board evaluation? Yes, annually. Oh, we've never done one. So the superintendent, I think 8 years had gone without an evaluation. And so there was no repercussions to that other than the board had really no idea what was going on, which was not a good thing.
It wasn't this district, right?
No, it wasn't this district. It was not.
Sorry.
Wait, just 1 second. I want to make sure everybody actually has an opportunity to, I didn't know if you had your finger up, Mr. Benahan.
No, I'm okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then I just want to check anybody online. Do they have any questions? Just unmute yourself or you put your hands up. Okay, I see no one online with questions. Now I'll go back to Mr. Sokolovic.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a second to address the thing, having no policing of it. We got to police ourselves. We took on this role as board members. We got elected to do the job as it's written and specified in state statute. We're very big on following statute and following policy, whether there's repercussions or not. I answer to a higher power, and I think we all should answer to the same higher power, which is the voter.
I absolutely agree with that. And as I say, if it's a question of we can do it well on August 2nd, or we can do it piecemeal on August 1st, that extra day wouldn't be, as much of an issue as doing it well. So that would be my only caveat to that.
Gotcha.
Don't rush it just to have it in the deadline, but because it's important, what you do has repercussions for the next year, basically. But I'm glad you said that, because that is important.
I have a question. In terms of superintendent evaluations in other districts, where have you seen other districts struggle?
I'd say one, coming up with a tool to use when there's a new superintendent. Again, what will often happen if they're coming from another district, here's what we used to use, and so that's not too bad. Oh, that's a good, I wish I had time to think about that question a little bit more, because I know there have been issues, and I'm trying to think about what they might be. I think part of the issue is how do we make sure that we balance the need to have a frank, open conversation with each other and still make sure the community is apprised of what the evaluation results are. That there's a balance between us getting behind closed doors sometimes in executive session to make sure we really understand where where we need to do better. And I say we because it isn't all on the superintendent. As a board, are we doing what we need to do to support? It's a mutually assured destruction is the opposite of that. So, but the difference is how do we make sure the community is apprised of what is happening in the district? And so again, that typically is a letter, a form, or something, but it's better to have something in writing, and that's voted on by the board, and that becomes the evaluation document. And the more, I've seen some boards try to say everybody writes what they think, and that's the document. I don't ascribe to that. It's what the board, as the collective entity known as the Board of Education, agrees the superintendent's performance was for the past year, and we try to get consensus on what that looks like. So that might be about the only other thing I can think of. Timelines, again, are part of the problem. there never seems to be a good time when nothing else is happening that we can do that, but summer often is when it takes place. And I guess go on, sorry, I'm thinking these things. The other thing is an absence of goals. If we haven't had the time, or if there, if we did, there are districts that don't have goals. There are districts that don't have curriculum. So are we following through on all the other points within that evaluation to make sure that when we come together and do it, we've lined everything up that we're supposed to?
Any questions? Any additional nuggets of advice moving forward? Oh, wait, Mr. Medina has a question online.
Yeah, I was going to just let you follow up, and I was going to go after you. So go right ahead. Can you hear me?
I was going to pass it back to our presenter, Mr. Medina. You can feel free to ask your question at this time, or if you want to wait till after Mr. Caruso goes.
No, that's okay. My question is, again, introduce myself. I'm Willie Medina, new board member. I was sworn in on December 1st, so I am new to the process, but I'm not new to the guidelines and things. I just wanted to ask if there are already guidelines that were set, and there is a goals that were already stated prior to me becoming part of this board that was agreed upon and voted on and presented, and then it wasn't voted due to a process, but it has been written down. Should we be using those that already was met upon over a period of time, and they are written down already?
I guess the question, are you talking about written down prior to you serving on the board or the superintendent being hired? Is this since the superintendent's been hired?
That's correct. So I signed on in December, back in November, and prior months or weeks before November, the ending of November, there was already discussions with the superintendent. To my understanding, again, I've seen some of it live before I was a board member, and then there was a meeting in late November in which I have all the documents and things that superintendent would like to have maybe change an item, and she wanted to go into executive session, but unfortunately at that meeting it wasn't eligible for executive session. There was a movement, a thing called to adjourn, to move it over to this December 11th. It was tabled to December 11th by the active chair, and then seconded by the acting and present acting vice chair. But then December 11th came and it was never done. And then months, here we are in May, and it wasn't done. The meeting, it was never brought up ever again by the chair, vice chair, or anyone in committee. Also, all three committee chairs did not bring this up. And I'm just wanted to say, because I was part of those listening meetings, but I wasn't a board member, but they are written down. We do have them. I believe maybe even some of my colleagues might have them with them right now at this time printed, but we do have some that we have in writing.
If that's true, I'm not saying it isn't, if that's true, then your work should be relatively simple in terms of when you get together to have this conversation. If there's already some work that's been done, it's when you got that somewhere, you might be 90% there, maybe 100% there already. It's just a matter of formalizing it so you can take the process forward.
Oh, yeah. Either October or November of last year, the prior chair set goals with the Board of Ed. I know we didn't meet with the community, but the board had set those goals. It's just that they weren't specific, measurable, no metrics to it, achievable. Not saying they're not relevant, but they just weren't time bound. And so if we can mutually agree that that's what we're going to go forward with what was written, I just don't want to silence the voice of new board members who are new to this process, because it's not going to necessarily there's goals. There's definitely goals that the superintendent could look into. It's just, if we had something more specific, like if we were looking towards it in order to have a fair evaluation, that wasn't part of the initial goals we set. So that there is some wiggle room. So that's why I'm hoping that we can get clarification, because we could just move forward with the goals that's set. It's just, I want to make sure I get the board's input.
I mean, I would suspect that once those goals, assuming those goals became the goals for the evaluation and for the year, that the superintendent is going to then take those goals and operationalize them or develop a plan which he could come back, and that would include some of the, here's the timeline, here's the expectation, deliverables, whatever. So she could kind of fill in the blanks on the SMART part of the goals. But I think that the sticking point is we need something to measure against. And rather than draw out the process farther, take what you have, make that work for now. I mean, I don't see this as we agree on it this year and we have to do it for the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. We learn, I mean, that's one thing I will say from most boards, when you're finished with the evaluation, before you put it to sleep for a year, I really suggest the boards look at the way it went, not these, the facts of the evaluation as much as the process. Did it work well? Where were there sticking points? Where could we do better? Let's finalize that for next year, because one of the difficulties is if I'm going to be measured against goals and I only hear about them a month ahead of time, I'm going to be judged about something I had very precious little time to actually have an influence on. So I'd rather have goals for this year, even if they're not as finite, let's say. But and again, if you have quarterly or at least within 6 months, a follow-up interim evaluation, we can talk about those things. Conversation will be helpful in terms of where are we with these? And I would say even if that's where this meeting goes tonight, after I'm out of here, then it might be that you say, what might operationalizing this goal look like for this year? That could be part of the conversation tonight. Just not to get into a lot of detail. I think, again, if we've had time to think about the goals, we have time to make plans. But if it's something we're just going to deal with tonight, I wouldn't look for detailed action beyond that yet. But I think that's fair to look for that in the near future. But that doesn't, once you've established that, it doesn't push the timeline back if we don't have time to do it immediately. The timeline is the timeline.
Oh, no, absolutely. I'm not trying to dispute. We have goals. I was like, that helps us part of the way.
Right.
And I think also just looking forward into the future, how we can utilize this summer to become a better board and use this evaluation as also self-reflection, so we can actually be more specific and measurable as to what we do next. So this is in case for any clarification, no point in trying to change what's there, because the superintendent's aware of what was set when we had that in the prior administration for the Board of Education. And so it's really to start what the process would look like.
What a lot of superintendents will also do as part of the process, and I mean, you have the criteria sort of established in this evaluation tool from FACAP. The superintendent might draft a self-evaluation and say, this is my self-evaluation for the prior year. In terms of this area, here's where we are, what we did, what we continue to do, et cetera, where we were successful, where we do more work, where we have to rethink it, whatever. But that could be part of the superintendent's contribution to this, that it isn't all one-sided. It isn't all the board saying, we're judging, but not to also see, where your superintendent feels, hey, I was really successful here. And it might not even be on your radar screen. And yet when you hear about it, think, yeah, actually, that's not bad. That's another reason for not doing it only that one time at the end of the year, because if we're knowing about these things going through the year, it makes it a lot easier to deal with things. The other reason I would point it out is it's happened to me a couple of times. It probably has happened to anybody who's ever been evaluated. I had a great year, did everything right, but the week before my evaluation comes up, something really, really stupid happens or really, really bad happens. And guess what? I get evaluated on 90%. That's not necessarily fair either. So if we have our interim times to have those conversations, it's not sitting there and festering for a long time. And it's not, and we have a better sense of what the year looked like rather than just what's it like today. pass fail. You know, I don't know that that is fair either.
Let the record reflect Mr. Medina is here in person. Did you say how you hear? All
Yes, Robinson, waiting for, he has a question, yes, he's, I do have my hand up, yes.
right, Mr. Traver? The interim, Mr. Medina, you can go forward. When Mr. Traver's available, I'll just jump back to him. Pardon? Oh. You're up.
I'm following up on what Mr. Medina said. We had a meeting with the superintendent at the end of October and agreed on what we thought were a complete set of goals for the year. They were to be acted on at the next regular board meeting. When they came up with the next regular board meeting, the superintendent said there was one item she wanted to change a little bit. As Willie just explained to you. It was not on the agenda for the executive session, nor was it necessarily appropriate for executive session. So it was to be raised at the December meeting, the next meeting. That meeting that it was on the agenda was November 27th. It was not on the agenda for December 11th. It has not been put on the agenda since then by the chair. It was tabled till December 11th, and it's never been raised since. So that's why we're perplexed by this not having been brought up in some of the stuff that's been said now in the last half hour to an hour, because it should have been brought up, and this should have moved forward promptly in December or January to have a proper process. So we are concerned about it being May, 6 months later, and having this presentation by you now about how to do it properly. So what do you call it, a general wisdom? Madam Chair.
Ms. Medina?
So my question, or my, statement that I want to add to your comments about it's not fair for superintendent in any position, in any location, to be evaluated with things that they were not aware. So I just want you to understand, I don't know how much conversation you had with the chair or the superintendent, but to my knowledge, as a community leader, that I was part of those listening to those meetings. So she's well aware of everything that has been put on paper. So it's not nothing that is new whatsoever, of what guidelines and what things were bullet point. She worked hand in hand with the executive team, the whole board chair, and all of that. It was until that November meeting, I want to make sure that on the record that this was done with her. She gave much insight and much discussion to formulate what she would be evaluated on. They worked together. It was voted unanimously. They might have been with all the board until that very moment. Okay, so I want to make sure that you're given all the facts, and we have the paperwork and I have documentation to prove all of that. There's not nothing that she's unaware of the process or what she will be evaluated on. And again, I, as a board member that wasn't a board member at that time, I'm ready to work with what was given to me, what I knew to be true.
Well,
Okay.
I'm not the board cop, so
That's what I was gonna ask. Is like, is this a trial? Like, the point of clarification I'm having is he's already stated a few times, this is supposed to be mutually agreed upon. It was not, because we did not actually vote on it in November. Whether it was tabled or not is beyond the point. Let's move on. It's May. Let's just get it done. We need to, I'm still talking, we need to work on this today so that we can have it done, mutually agreed upon, meaning the superintendent and the board will agree on it tonight, hopefully. It was not agreed upon in November because she asked for, I believe, I don't have the correct words, I don't have the, pardon me, you guys have the documents, but she had asked for an amendment or executive session to discuss one of the points. We did not do that. So it was not mutually agreed upon. So now this is what today's meeting's about. And hopefully, Mr. Group's not here, like he said, to be the board police. We just want to hopefully get it done today. That's all I have to say.
Yeah,
I'm not
well,
arguing.
Mr. Traver, you don't
I'm
have the
sorry,
floor right
proceed
now,
with
and I
all the
don't want to
meetings.
engage in a debate.
I was.
I had a
Wait,
counterpoint.
Mr. Traver, you do not have the floor right
Thank you.
now.
I have my hand up then.
Want to make sure I go around. And I have a comment on that. This is to establish the process. This whole idea of setting up blame and issues as to what occurred and what did not occur is the point that we need to move forward, as this is a requirement that we have to do per law. So it seems asinine and mute at this point to continue to point back. As I stated, there are goals. The goals as well as the process needs to be mutually agreed upon. Dr. Levy David is an employee, a public officer of the Board of Education. That item qualifies for executive session, as well as we contractually agreed to participate in this in executive session. So this is just to talk about the process that we can potentially mutually agree upon. Thankfully, Mr. Caruso has presented some options, whether we want to go with what was suggested from Mr. Sokolovic, the CABE evaluation, to share what another organization is that shared with what they're doing, as well as to truly take time to process all the stuff that was just presented to us. So this again is something preliminary that we can discuss, but going on a witch hunt as to what happened in the past, but moving forward, especially as it was explained, we do have time. And at no point is anyone trying to negate that. So while the point is asinine and void or irrelevant at this point, I just want to be able to focus that how can we develop a process like Mr. Sokolovic brought up, whether it's the CAPE one. We used one in the past. We used an interim one because we had board members and we had our previous interim superintendent that did not serve for a long period of time that felt more comfortable with something shorter. We have board members that started December 1 and it's May. So they have even less time to evaluate a superintendent as it was done in the past. So taking all of those factors into consideration today is why we're having this meeting and this preliminary conversation as to how to move forward. Now, I'm just going to go down because it was Mr. Traver Medina, Ms. Perez, myself, and then I'll go to Mr. Sokolovic, unless any other board member that hasn't spoken has something to say. Mr. Bennett, you keep making eye contact with me. Nope.
No, I'm okay right now. I just want to keep this process done correctly the way it is, and then we can keep forward.
Okay. Mr. Sokolovic?
Yes, I agree. It was never a vote on the goals, so they were mutually agreed upon. That point is correct. And again, I reiterate about the caps thing. But my main thing is we were discussing it being based on goals, district goals, and the executive session. I have here CABE prepared documents that actually says legal considerations. It was the suggested guidelines. Connecticut General Statute I-200, 1-200 said subsection 6 may be appropriate topic for executive session. However, district goals, procedures, policy, and data are not appropriate subjects for executive session under the Florida law. That is the correct reading and it's the correct understanding. So we can't go and talk about district goals behind closed doors.
We're not talking about district goals, Mr. Sokolovic.
Well, that was the initial harbinger of the delay. The whole process was trying to put one of those goals into.
Yeah, I reread that this afternoon and I was thinking about that. So in essence, if you were going to have a general discussion and come to consensus on what the goals should be, that should be in public session. If you are just saying, we have a set of goals that were agreed upon, is this going to be part of our process? That could be part of the discussion on process.
And since we have you here, it's going forward to the next step. So we don't have to ask this question later. Normally, a superintendent gives a presentation of data and everything that her evaluation, like basically, we call it like her evaluation, she'll be possibly giving school reports, grades, fiscal conditions, advocacy efforts, and what have you. That's basically data, correct? Would that, or would that have to be could that be an executive session as well?
I guess I'm not sure I have enough information to answer that completely, but I would say that the self-evaluation of the superintendent is just a draft of her contribution to the evaluation process. I'm not sure that I believe that should be considered privileged and confidential, because that's just a report as part of the process. Your document that relates to her performance on the goals would be part of that public document. So it's kind of a, and again, the other part of that I would say is, I'm not sure, two things. One, I mentioned the superintendent should prepare like a self-evaluation. Within that would be some of those metrics you're talking about. Here's the things that happened this year. Here's what we did. And I think that's where you'd see some of that data. The other part of that, though, is, as I was thinking about the other one started to slip away. I'm getting old. But as far as data presentations, I wouldn't like to see that linked specifically to evaluation, but that should be part of your annual calendar, and you're learning about this stuff throughout the year, because that's what boards should be doing.
Absolutely.
Our board meetings should be about data and student achievement and where are we doing well, where do we need to do better. And I don't know that you can cram all that into and consider all part of the evaluation process. So like I said, a superintendent self-evaluation could reflect on a lot of those points, but we should be getting those reports throughout the year. And still, it's in the back of our mind when we get to evaluation time, we've been getting these reports, we are aware of where we are. We're doing well, or we need to do better.
Yeah, because the main reason I was requesting that information is because every year since I've been on the board, I've wanted that presentation public. But we go with executive session, I'm outvoted. But this year is a little unique because I believe for the first time I haven't seen it in another contract. I don't recall seeing that the superintendent's contract calls for the evaluation to be done in executive session. So we would be in violation not to do the evaluation in the executive session. I'm just trying to get a little clarity because for the first time ever, I will vote for the evaluation itself be done in the executive session.
But part of that statute does say that you can do it, and in fact, only twice in the years I've been doing this, and this is my 30th year doing this job, I've only seen 2 superintendents demand a meeting be held in public.
And if final point, and my reason being behind that is because when we come out of evaluation, whatever weight of evaluation falls, if the public sees what we see and base our evaluation on, there will be more public buy-in to our evaluation process.
Well, I do believe that whatever document that you create from that should reflect what the board came up with. Yeah.
So we should have like notes if we give, we've done that before. Like if you give a 5, say she's exemplary because she did A, B, C, or if she's getting 1, she's not exemplary because she did not do A, B, C.
Yeah, and I think that other tool had the thing I have a problem with scoring is that if you can get a 3, and what that is 5 5s and 4 0s or 4 1s or close to, and that's a very different message than 9 3s. And so the numbers help us have a conversation, but I'm not necessarily sure the metric score is necessarily indicative of performance, but it does reflect how the board feels, and it allows for the discussion, and the discussion is what you capture in the document.
Right. So the narrative is, the narrative is the most important?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So
I think Ms. Casimir, you came off of mute. I didn't know if you had a question.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize I was off mute. Sorry about that. No question.
No problem. That's why I think it's kind of good just for us as a board to kind of process these documents, and I can make copies of what else was sent to me just for people to look at, whether we want to take the time as I've allotted for in agenda item 3 to do so, or we could just hold that and schedule another time for it. I want I was looking at this as a process where we have our goals already set from what was already done. So it's more about the process and which process we want to take in terms of evaluation. Because the CAPES one, but it has to be mutually agreed upon. And I have the samples, and then we have the Canterbury. So I just wanted to make sure everybody had that so we can have a process. And now, as you mentioned, guys, like it is about the narrative that it shows. But Mr. Traber has had his hand up for a while, so I apologize for that.
I hadn't finished what I was trying to say earlier, and I wanted to be clear with Ms. Perez, given her remark. I wasn't trying to find anything. I just thought we'd gotten stuck, and I had a great frustration with being stuck because I thought at the time when we had the discussion in October that we had made some breakthrough progress. It was a harmonious meeting in October, and I didn't know what the glitch was. Clearly, the superintendent had a concern that we wanted to hear.
Beautiful song.
Pardon me?
No, you still hear it coming.
So, I had hoped we would, hear that concern and resolve it quickly and move forward with, the process. And so it's frustrating to be in this place today, having done teacher evaluations for years. You don't start an evaluation in May, and here we are. And so I don't know how we started. And so we had some good work that was done 6 months ago that we can build on. It at least gives us a framework to build on something, as you pointed out, because what I heard, it's a little hard to follow this discussion in the middle of a soccer field in the scrimmage. But, once we started driving up, I was able to focus a little more, and it seemed as though we were not talking about what work had been done in the fall. And notwithstanding it wasn't within the first 30 days, it was still within the beginning of the school year and within the normal parameters for teacher evaluation and other evaluations. So not totally out of whack from, my experience as an educator. So I was sort of hoping we could move forward with that. And as I heard being discussed as we came out of the parking lot, consistent with, building on that for the next year, right? And trying to make it better in the future. And, as we've recently started focusing on SMART goals and trying to, come up with more measurable goals and making those goals better in the future. So that's really what my focus was, is not trying to start over in May. How do we go forward from here in the most constructive way? So that's what it struck me as is the best way for us to go forward.
So what I'm hearing is that you're about 99%.
Well, I heard you say that in the car when I was pulling up Lion Terrace, making a left onto Lion Terrace, that, if you're in that position, you're fairly close to being there. I heard you using that 90% figure. So that's where I was hoping.
It might be that it takes very little effort for you to get to the next.
Zero in on it and then learn our lessons. And I know when we met with the Great Cities guy that he was talking about trying to set up a process for the future, but doing that early, so that we don't find ourselves in this position again. So that's sort of where I thought we were at. And I did not understand, since it was not communicated to us why we were meeting tonight until I heard that part. So that's really what I'm sort of trying to catch up. So whether it's asinine or not, and I don't appreciate that word being bandied about quite so loosely, we were in good faith moving forward in the fall, and then progress stopped. And without it being communicated to us, that's where, and I don't see that as being asinine trying to figure that out. And that should not be the word that gets used when we were moving forward in good faith. So what I heard was a blame game being done in the car. And we don't want to blame, we want to move forward. And that's where I think that we're trying to figure out is how do we move forward in May, since we were obligated by contract to have done this by May. So that's
well, it sounds
what
like
that's Perez.
What I'm hearing is that's the next item on the agenda.
Okay, well, being that there's no more questions for Mr. Caruso, I want to thank Kate for coming. I appreciate it. Asinine is one of my favorite SAT words, and I will continue to use it even in court. So we're going to move on to the next agenda item, which is discussion and possible action concerning the employment, performance, or evaluation criteria of Dr. Carmela Levy David as public officer and / employee of Bridgeport Board of Education. This item for executive session, if someone wants to make it, Ms. Perez.
I move to go into executive session for the action item concerning employment, performance, and evaluation criteria for Dr. Levy David as a public officer, employee of Bridgeport Board of Education.
Okay, is there a second?
I second that.
It's been moved by Ms. Perez, second by Mr. Woodson. All in favor?
Discussion.
Aye.
Discussion.
Debate.
Just real quick, as I stated before, we're not going into the substantive issues of.
We're just talking about process.
Correct, we're just talking about process. Going to be no evaluation taking place this evening, so I think that would be great for the public to understand what process we're using. We've gotten through the process before. We're actually getting along pretty well if we take a deep breath every now and then, all of us. And I think this is something we should do in the public and the public should see. And that's all I've got for my points, and I'll be asking for a roll call vote. Yeah, I think Mr. Trigger got his hand up.
Oh, yes, Mr. Traber?
Yeah, I thought I heard again in the car ride up, and I have a little more clarity than I'm talking for a bit. The public involvement, I heard the chair ruin the lack of public involvement in this process. I heard Nick saying that the public awareness of what we're doing and why is important, that it's better for the public to understand how we're doing this and why we're doing this. So I would argue that this part of the process is not confidential. I understand when we get to the actual evaluation discussion why it is. But this strikes me as something the public has a right to and should understand.
Okay.
This is typically done in executive session, and for a lot of good reasons. I think that when you're done, the process itself can be shared with the community, and that would give the public what they need to hear. But until you've reached that 100% agreement, there may be some discussion that you want to have, and it's, again, I can only share with most people that.
Why would that be? We're not discussing anything confidential about her. We're discussing the process.
The process, but you're going to be potentially discussing parameters within that, and until you've had that conversation, it is typically done in executive session. I can only tell you that. In fact, typically is not the right word. It's always done in executive session. If there are exceptions, it's extremely rare, rather than sometimes. I can only.
As to why.
It's just the way they do it. I think you typically would consider anything to do with it. In fact, I would suspect that within the superintendent's contract, and Joe, you can check this because you know the language, that it, I think it says executive session. You even mentioned that earlier.
The evaluation itself, this is just setting up the mutually agreed process, which we've already begun in public.
Well, this is a matter for you folks.
Yeah, it's a matter of.
I can only tell you that most of the time, if not, they kick around 90% again, but most boards, this entire process is considered part of the evaluation process.
Okay, so it's been moved to go into executive session by Ms. Perez. It's been seconded by Mr. Woodson. Is there any more debate?
I just think it'd be, I guess, a discussion, not debate, like, it'd be better just to be able to go through all these documents together. We could really hatch it out in an executive session, decide which evaluation we want to go with, bring it to the public. We're not going to hide out which evaluation in the public. We're just going to discuss in great detail which one we should use. Bring it to the public next meeting, or at the end of this meeting, on which one we decided on. Then go forward creating goals in public and then evaluating them.
Mr. Benahan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know that as Mr. Sokol said, it's a process to let the community what is, what we're gonna do the process. Not something that we're gonna vote or we're gonna change something. If we go into executive session, for me, it's not necessary because but we have to hide things, something out the process gonna be with Dr. Kamala and David, let another community. So we elected from the community, we have to let another community how the process. Now it's not what we say, like we say, not something we're not gonna vote. But for me, hiding stuff like that, that's something we're gonna talk something private or off the, if I take different words, that's the way I feel.
I think the word, and again, I don't know how I'm in the middle of this discussion. The word hiding, I think, disturbs me because one can expect confidentiality in dealing with personnel matters, and this is a personnel matter, and that isn't hiding, that is confidentiality, are two different things. And that's all I would say.
I follow the law. That's all. Thank you. Thank you. No more question, Madam Chair.
Okay, Ms. Perez?
May I add that, like, you already said it for me, but this is not hiding, we are just going to talk about her evaluation, which should be confidential for our policies. We're not going, sorry.
Yeah, no,
I
just
thought
go
you-
ahead, correct that.
We're not gonna talk about evaluation, we're gonna talk about the process, about which one we're gonna select. And that's a personnel matter, again, which should be a executive for our policies. So if we're going by policy, we should go by policy.
Sorry, my hand.
Oh, sorry.
I just want to make sure I understand, because again, I was part of the process as a community leader. This process already was done in the public. I just want to make sure everybody has that in their mind. We're saying that we want to go in second session, which I haven't decided whether it's yes for me or not. But I'm just saying that this process was already started and done within the public. So again, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. The goals were set in
Sorry.
public. This is not about the goals.
Okay.
This is about the evaluation mechanism. So those documents in front of you, as well as I'll share what I've received from the other organization. So it's not about the goals that you keep bringing up. That's why I said it was asked nine of move, because
So
it's
you're
not
trying-
about the goals. Goals are set.
So you're trying to figure out how to
It's the.
apply the goals to.
We have a sample from Canterbury, we have a K-CAP sample, we have another sample from the other organization we're part of. And whether we wanted to go about and look at the information we have in front of us today in executive session as to how the process will look for the evaluation. So we have what we're going to go back to an education standpoint, we have the materials we're testing her on. Are we going to do a Scantron sheet? Are we going to do an open-ended question? Are we going to do A, B, C? Or are we going to do A through E? Are we going to do it on a score of 1 through 5 with commentary? That's the process we're trying to develop today, not the goals. The goals are already set. And what I had mentioned earlier is not that the goals are not SMART goals as we learned from the prior training and information provided to us, but how we're going to move forward into the next school year with establishing community-based SMART goals and being able to grow from this process together as a board. So this is not about the goals. I apologize for disrupting, but I just want to be clear, because you're saying we did it already. We have the goals. I'm not trying to sit there and think about that. It is literally, we just got handed a ton of information. I would like to share that information. It is qualified for executive session. And so in order to process all that, it's always done in executive session. And so if I don't want to present other options, but that's how it's done, or if we want to postpone this for another special meeting, so we've had time to digest the information, that's an option. The whole thing is that we know contractually, if you started August 1 of last year, 30 years, you only, 30 years would be a long time for you to get evaluated. But 30 days beforehand of that, so that's about one. We should have that done beforehand because we don't want to do it 4th of July weekend in case any of us want to go somewhere. But it's, I don't know if we do that meeting that week. But we needed the timeline, but we went together and rushed through it. It's been moved and seconded moved by Ms. Perez, seconded by Mr. Woodson. This requires a supermajority, so at least 6 votes. And so that is the process, not the goals. The list what you're talking about, that's already been set and established. So that's why I said that part was asinine, because. Okay, but I cut you off, sorry, I apologize. But if you have
that
any,
one, believe me, you're good.
if there's anything else you would like to add, because we're technically in debate. So, if not, I'll just continue. Now, Mr. Woodson, do you have anything? Ms. Casimir, anything to add in debate?
No.
Okay, Ms. Bain, do you have anything to contribute to debate?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, so seeing that debate is done, Mr. Sokolovic has called for a roll call vote as to whether we go into executive session. So, Ms. Perez?
Ms. Bain,
Yes, we go into executive session.
Christine Baptiste Perez,
Yes.
Albert Benahan Grajales,
Yeah.
Letitia Casimir,
Yes.
Willie Medina,
No,
Jennifer Perez, those with yes. Just I forgot my name for a minute, guys, sorry. Joseph Sokolovic,
No,
I heard you.
I was waiting. Robert Traver,
No.
Andre Woodson,
Yes.
motion fails.
Okay. Motion fails.
I need to adjourn.
There's a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? It's been moved by Ms. Perez, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. The time now is 7:53 p.m. The meeting has adjourned. Have a good night.
These supposed to be distributed, I have a second.